The agenda's election coverage this week focused on the issues at play in the 416. We weighed the outcome of the Ontario Leaders' Debate and examined from Burlington to Durham what is being heard on the hustings in the 905. And as you may be able to see over my shoulder, we've got into kind of full campaign mode here too. We were redesigning the set in anticipation of election night of the 12th, when we're going to be on the air from 8 o'clock until it's over, which is usually around midnight. The agenda's Week in Review begins with last night's interview with Ontario's 25th Premier, Kathleen Wynne. She's been Premier of Ontario for almost 16 months, and it has not been an easy time for Ontario's 25th Premier. Plagued with the continuing gas plant scandal and the constant threat that the plug would be pulled on her minority government at any time. Nevertheless, the Liberal leader thinks she has a good story to tell on education, on building public transit, and on running a lean government. And with that, we welcome Kathleen Wynne back to TVO. Nice to have you here.
Steve. Great to be here.
Let's start with this. I'd like to open with a kind of a broad question. So, are you asking the voters to render a verdict on the past 16 months of Kathleen Wynne-led government or the past 11 years of Liberal administration?
I'm taking my plan to the people of Ontario, Steve. I'm asking them to look at what I have done in the last 16 months, and most of all, look at the plan that we're laying out. And it's a plan to invest in the people and in the infrastructure and in the businesses in this province. But that doesn't mean I'm not proud of the work that I did when I was Minister of Education, when I was Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs and Housing and Aboriginal Affairs. I'm very proud of the repair that we did to the fabric of our public services in Ontario. When we came into office in 2003, and I got involved because I was so concerned about what was happening to publicly funded education, what was happening to the relationship between the province and municipalities, and I wanted to be part of a government that was going to repair those things, and we have. We've got great outcomes in education. We've got 83% of kids graduating from high school. We have a very good partnership with municipalities, and we're repairing a lot of the damage that was done and have. But I'm bringing my plan, I'm bringing my integrity and my vision for the province to the people.
If I've heard it once, though, I've heard it 100 times while I've been out there on the hustings. I like that Kathleen Wynne, but oh my goodness, that party needs to be sent to the penalty box. And I wonder what you would say to people who like you and think you're okay, but really are sick to death of e-health and gas plants and Orange and feel a need to send the Liberals packing for a while.
Well, I get that there are people who are angry about those things, about one or more of those things. I get that, but I also want people to know that we have made changes as a result of those. That I think the test of a government or a politician or a person is whether you learn from situations, And there isn't a government in the history of the world that hasn't done some things that they should have done differently. And so I have made changes in the last 16 months that I have been in office. I've made changes to make sure that, particularly in the case of the relocation of the gas plants, because that's been something that we've really dealt with over the last 16 months. I've made changes to ensure that that doesn't happen again, including bringing in legislation, including changing the rules around locating big pieces of infrastructure and working with communities. So I would ask people to look at that and then look at our plan, which really is a plan about investment. And quite frankly, Steve, this election's coming down to some pretty stark choices. It's coming down to some stark choices between our plan, which is a plan of investment in building up the province, and the Conservatives, which begins with firing 100,000 people and really is based on a flawed math error.
Well, in fairness, they're not going to fire 100,000 people the first day they take office. They're going to eliminate 100,000 positions over 4 years.
Well, okay, but
that's what they say.
Yeah, that is an enormous hit to our communities. I met with mayors today from Owen Sound, from Kenora, from Vaughan. Timmins called in. The mayor of Kapuskasing was here. We had the mayor of Oakville, a whole range of mayors. They're very worried, Steve, that if the Conservatives get in, if Tim Hudak has his way, then they will see a repeat of the downloading of services onto municipal property taxes, onto communities that cannot afford to pay those bills. And we've been trying to reverse that. We've been trying to reestablish the relationship between province and municipalities, and they're very worried that if Tim Hudak has his way, that will all be undone.
When you say repeat, you're referring, of course, to the Mike Harris years.
I am.
You referenced him in the debate the other night. If it's okay to say you get Hudak, then it's Mike Harris all over again, why is it not okay for people to say, if you put Wynne back in, it's McGuinty and all of his problems all over again?
Well, here's the thing, and that question has been asked of me many times. And I have been very clear that, just as I said to you, I'm proud of the work that we did in education and in healthcare. There were some things that we did that I am not proud of and that I think should have been done very differently, and I've been clear about those. That's not what Tim Hudak is saying. He's running on a platform that replicates and in fact goes farther than what Mike Harris did. So that's the difference. If Tim Hudak were saying, no, here are the ways in which I'm different than Mike Harris, and I'm not going to cut those frontline services, and I am going to have a good working partnership with municipalities, that's not what he's saying. He's saying he's pretty happy with everything that he did under Harris. He wants to do it again and go farther.
Let's talk about those frontline services, because you did an event earlier this week where you were, I think it was in Don Mills at the Prince Hotel, and you had, I think, about 70 people, everything from teachers, nurses, paramedics behind you, showing that public services were basically with you. I know you've been critical, you mentioned it again just a second ago, about the 100,000 positions Tim Hudak wants to eliminate. However, we have to point out that in the third year of the budget plan that you introduced, you yourself are calling for an $800 million spending decrease in program spending in order to balance the books by 17-18. How do you do that and not cut any public services at all? So we do it in the way that we have been doing it for the last few years. So if you look at this year's numbers, or 13-14, we were looking for $1 billion in savings. We actually found $1.5 billion because the changes that we're making, Steve, are structural. They are changes in the way we deliver service. So if we look at healthcare, the kinds of changes we're making are in the way we deliver home care, for example, the way we deliver services to the elderly, making sure that we take services out of hospital that don't need to be in hospital, put them in the community, make sure people get the services where they need them, when they need them.
Did we get anything new tonight?
I don't know if we got anything new. It depends how much you've been following the campaign, I guess. I mean, for me, I heard a lot of the same lines over and over again. I guess I was a little surprised that I didn't hear more from Kathleen and Andrew Horwath about Tim Hudak's plan to cut 100,000 jobs, and we heard about it, but we didn't hear about it as much as I thought we would, because it's been such a polarizing issue on the election trail. And the same goes for his questionable math and the million jobs plan. I thought we would hear more of that, but we didn't. I mean, to Kathleen Wynne's credit, she did try. She tried to say, a couple of times, Mr. Hudak will push us back to recession, which is a line we've heard. She tried to say, the math doesn't make sense, but it just didn't seem to stick as much as you would think it would.
The only substantive announcement that I heard was that Tim Hudak would resign in he didn't say in 8 years, but I'm assuming in 8 years, if his million jobs plan didn't work out. So that was something new. I hadn't heard that before. But I wouldn't take too much stock in that. I think that's more of a ploy. I think ultimately a politician could say, well, it's only been 4 years. I need another. I was looking at things from a two-term perspective.
His plan is an 8-year plan. Mark, you grumbled, no one cares about
I don't think people care about the policy. And this is from a guy who wrote hundreds of pages of policy for a mayoral election that was never used because we didn't need it. Because people want to know whether they trust people, right? It's about who this person is. Do you trust him or do you trust her to run the government? And what I heard sort of coming through from the three candidates today, Tim Hudak, his message that I think came through was He's going to be honest. He's going to tell you the truth, no matter how hard it is, and he's going to work on jobs.
That's a line, though, Mark. I mean, I'm the only guy that's going to be honest in this?
No, that is a line. And he kept going back to Kathleen Wynne every time she said anything. Yeah.
Line, L-I-N-E, yes.
He kept going back saying, see, she didn't tell you the truth. See, she didn't tell, even when she did, it doesn't really matter. He was pressing home that that's his differentiator. Andrea Horwath, her message was, you know, I'm here because life is too affordable. Life is too hard. Government should make it easier for you. And what I heard from Kathleen Wynne was, if, you know, everything is fine, don't make any changes. You can't go this way, you can't go that way. Don't make changes.
I guess I would say there are two kinds of campaigns and there's two kinds of debates in campaigns. One is where policy counts. They're rare, but we have had them. And the other is where character counts, because the voters are not sufficiently engaged to be able to make a judgment about the nuance of policy, or they're confused and they don't know who to believe. So then they make an assessment of character. And I think this debate tonight was a microcosm of the campaign as a whole in that respect. Which one of you three do I believe? Which one of you do I like? Who's for me? And those assessments are much more personal and emotional assessments than their policy assessments. And again, I mean, we're sounding like stuck records. I think that Horwath and Hudak won that contest.
Okay, the H's are doing well according to this table. Diana, did you expect more substance tonight, or were you expecting, as Robin says, you know, sort of character debate?
I mean, it's hard to tell, right? I mean, it's hard to cram we've done now, 5 weeks of a really long campaign. It's hard to cram that into an hour and a half long debate, especially when you've got all these different responses. So I think we did hear policy nuggets here and there. I think with Ms. Wynne, she threw out a lot of her plans, but sometimes they came at you too fast, and you're like, and I was listening, and I'm like, oh yes, I've seen that. That's in her platform. I know what she's talking about. But for a viewer, perhaps it came at you in too much of a barrage, and you're like, whoa, what? So I think there was substance. How much that resonated with viewers, I guess that'll remain to be seen.
And is that bad political marketing?
Well, I was thinking the Tim Hudak line about, you know, I'll resign after, you know, if you can't do that, that's classic consumer politics. And that's where you think about political consumer. We consume democracy, or we consume politics. So if I don't do this, there's a money back guarantee, right? I will step down if I can't deliver that. And you can demand this of me, and if I don't follow through, then this is what, you know.
It's effective?
This is what I'll resign. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how effective it is, but it speaks to how politics can be done, and certainly how we look at politics. So what are our choices? What will you give me? How am I better off? What are you planning? I mean, and certainly we think about that in terms of citizens, but much more now it's about sort of, as a, you know, I'm a product that you can buy, that I've been designed, I know what you want, and if you don't get this, I will give you this back, which I think leads to a bit of that disengagement in terms of voters overall, because we're not thinking about it so much as obligations and responsibilities and privileges, we're thinking about it in terms of shopping.
And tell us how it benefits me.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And Andrea Horwath did a good job of that, and I think Tim Hudak did a good job of that. Kathleen Wynne told us a whole list of stuff she was going to do. So what? All right, the Million Jobs Plan, kind of a silly name. No one on earth, I'll bar none, no one on earth knows if that's the right number, if they can do it, if that's how many they need. It doesn't matter, right? What we get from that, if you're a voter, is, okay, he cares about jobs. And whether I have a job or I don't have it, if I don't have a job, that's what I care about. If I do have a job right now, I'm afraid of not having a job. So I think that's important.
So what value is there in polls during this campaign?
Well, there's the thing that, you know, these parties are doing their own polls, and they'll only comment, of course, on the public ones, or if they're losing, they'll say that our internal polls are showing us doing better. So they have this information, and their information is usually better because they can spend more money on it. Media polls are mostly done for free or for cost. So they have more information and better information, but we, at least as the public, should have the same sort of information that the parties are working with. And I think there's also that it's information, and voters have the right to as much information as there is available. And if, you know, strategic voting, that sort of thing, if voters want to do that, they should have the choice to. And I think it just sort of levels the playing field between the public and the parties, and is also just, you know, another source of information. And there's also the thing that, you know, newspapers love polls because they tend to get good readership. So voters want to see polls. So there must be something to them.
All right, the debate has wrapped up just a little while ago. We have had our panel in talking about winners and losers and who did well and who doesn't. Historically speaking, Eric, how much of a turning point is the debate in terms of polls?
Well, it can be a huge turning point, or it can just solidify sort of the trends that were taking place before the debate. In the federal election in 2011, Jack Layton, did a good debate, and combining that with some of the other things that was happening in Quebec, it helped propel the party forward. So that it can be a debate can be an important part of a race. In 2011, in the provincial election, the polls didn't really change all that much after the debate, so it didn't really change what was going on. But if the debate can sort of confirm what people are thinking about the leaders, then it can have a real effect, although you're not actually seeing the effect in the numbers because the numbers aren't going to move.
And what are you going to be watching for tomorrow morning? A number of polls will come out in the next couple of days. What are you going to be watching for in those polls?
Well, obviously for the Tories and the Liberals, it's if one of the leaders managed to take the debate and gain some momentum from it. For the NDP, they haven't been able to build any momentum up to here in the campaign, and now the campaign is almost over. So it'll be interesting to see. If the NDP is going to be able to sort of build some campaign in these some momentum, in these last few days. But one of the things to keep an eye on is also the perception of who wins. There's the people who watch the debate, and then there's the people who watch the news or they read the newspaper.
How long does it take, Eric, for that effect, the sort of debate effect, to translate into the polls? Are we talking a couple of days, or what are we talking about?
Well, we'll probably see a poll or two in the next couple of days that will be done sort of, right after the debate or the day after. So that, that'll cook the effect in a little bit. But we'd probably want to wait until probably the beginning of next week when some of the polls that are going to be in the field for several days will capture any effect. And so we might not know exactly what kind of effect the debate will have until the beginning of the week. But if we get some polls that are done right afterwards, we might get an early indication of what voters thought in terms of who did the best.
How do we deal with the troubles, the challenges of transit and transportation in Toronto?
Well, absolutely. The backstory on this, of course, is that in 11 years, nothing much has happened, that we're still waiting for the bus. In fact, when she was transportation minister, Ms. Wynne cut $4 billion out of Transit City. Do we all remember Transit City? And there were ads. That was under David Miller. Otherwise, Transit City would have gone ahead at that point. So here we are. We're still fighting about it. They're a room full of transit plans. What do we have to do? Shovel in the ground. We need a relief line as soon as possible. We need to electrify that air rail link I was just talking about and make that a relief line. We need buses. Olivia Chow's talked about this. We need buses on the road. That's a simple, fast fix. We need money into the transit system. How do we get it? We can talk about after with Josh, but it's absolutely critical. I mean, we're so far behind now. We used to be number one in North America. Now we're one of the worst. And by the way, our fare recovery is one of the worst in all of the 35 major cities. So you're paying more and getting less in Toronto.
Mitzi, Sherry makes the point that the Premier, the leader of your party, was once transportation minister. She said she didn't do a very good job on that file. I mean, what is your party's plan now to deal with gridlock 2014?
Our Premier is the only leader that is really standing up for investments in transit and infrastructure that has
what does that mean, standing up?
A fully costed plan. We have a $29 billion fund that we've put together for infrastructure in transit across this province, $15 billion of that right here in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, because it's actually a system and a network of transit that we need so that people can get from home to work, to places of worship, to places of play. And that's what we need. We're actually building transit right now. We have the Eglinton Crosstown, which is tunneling away. We know that. We've seen that project. It's underway. We also have expanded subway, extending that Spadina subway up north. So there are transit projects underway. We know the Union Pearson Express Rail is getting set to open very, very soon. And we also have plans in place for the electrification of the GO line. We have introduced two-way all-day GO, half-hour service right across the Lakeshore line. There is a Guild stop right in my riding of Scarborough-Guildwood. I know commuters are using that. I absolutely agree with you that transit is costing us in terms of the $6 billion of congestion. It's also costing us in terms of our quality of life and our health, because it's taking time away from families and from really spending those quality times that you need. We have to make these investments. Our government is actually making up from a $100 billion infrastructure deficit that was left by the PC Hudak years, and we have to continue to invest in transit and infrastructure in Toronto.
David, over to you.
Just one point. It was if you are using names, it's Mr. Harris, not Mr. Hudak. But anyway, I'm somewhat amused because this is a wonderful example of the problem we deal with. That we have the Liberals and the NDP both saying we need to do all these wonderful things. There's one minor issue that hasn't been discussed, and that's where the heck are we going to get the money for it?
We're getting to that.
Our point, of course, is we're the only ones that seem to have the courage to say, here's how to do it. We're going to have to make difficult decisions, but here's how we raise that money. We're going to be saving money in the public sector. We're going to be freezing wages. And by the way, freezing wages for a 2-year period is a much more civilized and effective way than cutting positions, okay? And that's going to save us probably $2 to $3 billion a year in our estimates. And that can go a long way over 10 years to paying for transit. We are not, and we've said this categorically, we are not raising taxes. I know there's been all this wonderful euphemism of revenue tools, which, let's face it, by any other name, is a tax. So,
okay, we're going to talk about revenue tools, money, financing, however you want to characterize it. I want to ask, what is your first priority transit-wise in the 416?
Well, I said to you earlier, I don't want to dwell on process, but it is important. In order to get things done, we need somebody in charge. And we're saying it's no longer this trying to coordinate. The province should be in charge of subways, GO Transit, and the major highways. And we're going to build an east-west subway line from Scarborough to Etobicoke. We're going to expand subway service generally. And also, very important, because I know I have been on all forms of the transit all through my career, we're going to expand the GO Train and GO Bus service so that we get more flexibility during the day, because most people who live in the 905 zones, as they all know, you get great train service in the morning and the evening, and then there's this gap in the day.
Okay, you mentioned subways. That is perfect, because I want to roll a clip. We did a show last week on transportation. Cherise Burda of the Pembina Institute was on discussing the downtown subway relief line. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Downtown relief line that people are talking about, the downtown relief subway, is a really important investment for next year's, or for the next generation, because it's going to take 10 to 15 even further years to build that. And we need solutions for this generation that's in a mobility crisis. We've got the Gardner closed, Lakeshore's closing, we're stuck, we're jammed in subways, our streetcars aren't going anywhere. So we need to look again to these other cities to quick to deploy solutions to get us moving.
All right, David, let me come back to you, because we were talking just before, you mentioned subways. Cherise Burda says, you know what, subways, long ways down the road. So what are you going to do now about gridlock?
Well, I said, I think our point is we can do things much more quickly than other people are claiming they can. I mean, we've heard proposals from John Tory and Olivia Chow on the municipal side. We think we can accomplish what we're talking about much more quickly. I mean, we can expand GO Train service and flexibility and frequency very, very quickly. Those are things we can move on very quickly. And the east-west line that we're talking about, we're certainly not talking about completing that in 10 years.
East-west line, what route does it take?
Well, I said we're talking about putting something in that would go from sort of the south part of the west end over to Scarborough.
I think it's the first time I've heard about this is today. Where is it? On what route? There's one going in on Eglinton. Where's your route?
Well,
on what line?
This would be a new route.
On what?
Okay.
Where does it run?
All right.
One thing we haven't spoken about is, and it would be a very quick fix, just to her point, and that's putting money into bike infrastructure. We need more people on bikes, but they're not on their bikes because it's dangerous and you get hurt. So we need, what we're saying is $5 million a year at least to put into bike infrastructure. That's a very quick fix. I've talked about the buses, that's a very quick fix. But it's interesting because it was under the Tories. We used to, of course, look after transit provincially, and 50% of the operating costs of the TTC was provincial. Tories got rid of that. So it's interesting to see that they're coming around now and saying that they'll, upload the cost to the provincial level. It's news to me, but that's a good thing. And then certainly we have proposed that as well. But buses, bicycle infrastructure immediately, and get busy on these. And by the way, the air rail link should also be a relief line. It should stop along the way. It could stop along the way, and that's almost ready, as Mitzi has said. Why don't we make that a transportation route?
The broken promises has to be looked at. The fact that we were promised an all-day go, we were promised a two-way all-day go into Brampton that would go all the way up into Orangeville. If that goodwill had been built, if the trust had been there that that promise had been fulfilled, it would make more sense to say, listen, we can put a hold on other expansions and we can work on easing some of the gridlock in Toronto, because it is a natural hub for the rest of the province, and investing in our capital would encourage growth and development in the city, which would also spill into the province. And I think there's merit to that and people understand that. But the broken trust, the fact that the Liberals promised to build that, or to make sure there was a two-way all-day go into Brampton and into Malton, not having that has broken a lot of trust. We are committing to having a two-way all-day go as the NDP. That's something we need to have. Then we can look at some of the priorities in Toronto, which is something we all, I think, agree on, that it's important to have.
Jeremy, across the country, this is why politics is stuck, is because it's all about each party in every province where they're in power just criticizing and jumping all over the promises that they didn't make, when all of these things are being created in such a hostile environment that it's very difficult for parties to even have honest discussions and come up with proposals, because if there's anything that's weak about it, you can just bash it around for years and then nothing gets done. I mean, what's the future of transit to you? Is it roads? Is it more cars with fuel that is monopolizable and is unhealthy for us and is not renewable?
Peter, what I was speaking of was transit, actually. I don't know if you heard what I was saying. I was talking about GO trains, not about roads. And I think what's important is that if we want to build trust in the discussion, there needs to be some forethought before a promise is made. You can't just blindly make promises and then expect people to trust the government to make decisions.
But you're asking them to trust you again, and in other provinces they're saying the same thing about your party.
Thoughtful decision making.
But that's where Metrolinx comes in, Jagmeet, as you know.
But the decisions can't be, you can't make a decision on the eve of an election and then break that promise. Those type of decision making is what I think people are concerned about.
But Metrolinx is the body that is doing the long range regional planning. So a GO train to Bowmanville, for example, is in phase 2. Not everything can be done right away, but it's that body that everyone has input into to create that plan and to change it as we go. Otherwise, we get into a bun fight about who got what and who's not getting what. So that becomes a bit of the transit Bible, if you will. And can it change? Yes. Can it evolve? Yes. But that is the plan for regional transit growth. So we can shape it, we can change it.
I think the most interesting thing here is that every single party wants to do two-way all-day GO service on all the lines at some point. But they spend so much time attacking each other over it. I'm not sure we're building the political will that we need. I think Peter was making a very salient point that when parties agree, I think they need to learn to agree. And when everybody says we need to build up our transit system, but then they just attack each other over how, the nitty gritty of how they're going to do it and what's going to go first. And then constituency politics come into play. The people who elect the right party are the ones who get it, instead of us looking at the region and what we need to do. And when we talk about all-day two-way GO service, when we talk about electrifying or not electrifying the rails, those are important conversations, but there are bigger, broader issues such as who has the rights to the rail in that corridor. If we really want to do this, we need to talk about maybe actually investing a lot of money in new tracks, in additional tracks. And that would take a lot of money, it would take a lot of time to appropriate the land, and it would take a lot of political will. And I don't think it would necessarily happen as long as parties, when they agree on a point, continue to fight over the minutia as opposed to trying to find a solution that works for everybody.
Mike, Tracy says, done a pretty decent job of creating jobs in the 905. What do you think?
Well, this is an issue near and dear to my heart. I've been running a manufacturing company for 25 years, so no, the record is horrible, frankly. We've lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs since the Liberals took power. They've replaced that with 300,000 government jobs. And I see it firsthand. I've had that gut-wrenching experience of going to an employee who I know has a mortgage and kids and responsibilities and having to lay them off, mainly because of misguided government policies. And, as you started this out with, jobs are the big issue right now, particularly for our young people. I have 2 daughters in their 20s, so I have a pretty good contact with that 20-something age group. And I had a experience a few weeks ago where I was in a pub having a beer with one of my daughter's friends. And I know he's a qualified welder. And I said, "So, you're working right now?" He goes, "No, Mike," he said, in fact, I'm pretty sure that full-time work is a thing of the past. Well, that was crushing to hear that, frankly, and it made me feel a lot better about what we're doing here and our proposals to try and create more jobs in Ontario.
But I have to ask, so with the 100,000 job reduction by your party, how is that going to affect the 905? Because they're not just central government jobs. They're talking firefighters, frontline people that deliver service.
We are not talking frontline people. It's very clear we've been misrepresented very badly on that. What we have said is that we'll reduce the size of government by 100,000 people over 4 years. 50 to 90,000 government people retire every year at all levels of government. A large part of that will be attrition, and we've said we will not be cutting at the front lines. We're looking at the bloated bureaucracies.
Those are still jobs, though. No firefighters?
There would be cuts to educational assistance in the education.
That's right. I just had a conversation the other day with a school board trustee at the Kawartha Pine Ridge School Board, which is the big one in our riding, and they employ 3,000 teachers. And they, in anticipation of the election, did the math on their school board, and the net effect of the adding a couple of students to each classroom and the reductions and the reduction in the number of kids in all-day kindergarten, the net effect on those 3,000 teachers is 29 positions, and that was from a school board trustee. They retire 100 to 150 teachers a year in that school board. So there's, in my view, and looking at the numbers, nobody on the front lines of any service has anything to fear from a PC government.
But Mike, it sounds too good to be true. Like, I wish you would lead with a little bit of even just healthy skepticism about what could go wrong. Like, this is a huge thing. It's not like somebody in Ontario has created hold on a sec, created 1 million jobs before. And, your leader seems to have gotten inspiration from it from the US Republicans and the Tea Party, with sort of a work to right mentality of employing people at wages that can't support them, so that the rest of society needs to cover multiple ways to support them, and then government seems bad because it can't take care of everyone, as opposed to, considering what we're talking about, which is shifting taxes off of incomes for a business and for others, and onto the resources that we're giving away to fundamentally create a new economy so that we can have future jobs that aren't in the service industry at non-living wages.
All right, well, you covered a lot of ground there.
But what are you skeptical about the program?
I'm not skeptical at all. When I look at the 10 measures that we have put in place or we're proposing in order to create jobs, they're all very reasonable. Every one of them is. And we're talking 1 million jobs over 8 years. That's 125,000 jobs a year. That is a doable. We've done it before. That's not a absurd number at all.
Notwithstanding the math issues with the 1 million jobs, I think people in the 905 and beyond are very concerned about the 100,000, because if you fire 100,000
we're not going to fire 100,000 people.
Well, however you do
June 13th is not Pink Slip Day in Ontario.
Well, I'm not sure you're guaranteeing there won't be pink slips, but whenever that happens, you don't just affect that person, you affect everyone in that household. You affect purchasing power. It's, I think, a very dangerous proposition that could set us back tremendously.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.